Today is the 16th day of the Omer. The Omer, it's the way in which we commemorate the first barley offering of the spring season. In the temple, from the second day of Passover on, they would count off 7 weeks after that first offering and eventually end up at the summer harvest festival, Shavuot, which we will come to in a little bit over a month. So today is day number 16. There is a passage from a medieval code, the Arba'a Turim HaShalem, the Tur, Nohagim b'kol hamikomot shelo lisa isha ben Pesach le'atzeret, v'hatam shelo leharbot b'simcha shebe'oto zman metu talmidei Rabbi Akiva, that there is a tradition amidst Jewish communities. This is a 14th century text. There's a tradition amidst Jewish communities that from the holiday of Passover until the holiday of Shavuot, so spring harvest to the summer harvest, 50 days, that the Jewish community would not increase their happiness. It would be some version of a mourning period. And that mourning period, as told by this medieval code, is because during that time between Passover and Shavuot, Rabbi Akiva's students died. So we are in now a quasi-mourning period in Judaism, in which if you call and ask one of the rabbis at Addis to officiate at a wedding during this period, it's a blackout date. We've got lots of blackout dates on the Jewish calendar. Most of them have to do with our schedules, but some of them have to do with holidays too. If there are extenuating circumstances, we will officiate during many of these times, like this time, but for the most part, we do not. It is also a time in which people stop maybe shaving or cutting their hair. There are some that do not go to certain kinds of concerts during this particular period. And the question I've always asked myself but not looked into more deeply this year is, what is it about Rabbi Akiva's students dying during this period that animated this particular part of the tradition? So the first thing I want to say about Rabbi Akiva's students dying, and I'm just going to say this so that we can get past it, it didn't happen. It's not a historical memory. It's a different kind of memory. Professor Shama Friedman, who is probably the greatest living Talmud scholar today, only seconded by Christine Hayes, Professor Christine Hayes, who will be teaching at 1:15 in the Beit Midrash. You have an opportunity to learn with one of the greatest Talmud scholars walking through this earth right now. You should avail yourself of that. Anyway, Professor Shama Friedman said, there can be no gleaning of a historical kernel without first isolating the literary kernel. If the Talmud tells you that something happened, before trying to figure out whether there is historical truth to it based on obvious historical sources, first delayer the text that it comes from. So there are 4 texts that this tradition comes from, or 4 different places in rabbinic literature that we find this story. The story emerges from a dispute on a verse from Kohelet, Ecclesiastics, that states, "In the morning sow your seed, and in the evening do not withhold your hand, for you do not know which shall prosper, whether this or that, whether both alike shall be good." We plant in the morning and the evening, and we plant in the evening because we don't know whether what we planted in the morning will actually take root. Rabbi Akiva understands this verse to mean if one had students while they were young, they should continue to take on additional students as they grow older, because, as the verse teaches, we don't know which students will take. And the way in which the rabbis illustrate Rabbi Akiva's take on this verse, at least in the Talmud Bavli, is like this. Shnei Masar Elef Zugim Talmidim Hayulo LeRabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva had 12,000 pairs of students in the area that stretched from Gvat to Antipatris in Judea, meaning 12,000 pairs of students. Rabbi Akiva had 24,000 students spread out across the land of Israel. V'kulan metu b'perek echad, and they all died in an instant. Why did they die, the Talmud asks, or the Talmud teaches, Mipnei shelo nahagu kavod ze lazeh, because they treated each other with disrespect. 24,000 in an instant, students of Rabbi Akiva perish because they did not respect one another. And after that, the Talmud says the world was desolate of Torah until Rabbi Akiva, after they died, found new rabbis in the south and taught his Torah to them. And those new rabbis immediately went out into the world, and Torah flourished once again. So, why did I say this story didn't happen? Well, here's another version of this story. This part of the sermon is dedicated to the one who said ungenerous, parsimonious, stingy, mean, miserly, tight-fisted, mingy, and all of the above in his sermon today. In the Kohelet Rabbah version of the story, Ecclesiastics Rabbah, Midrash on Ecclesiastics, it says that Rabbi Akiva had 12,000 pairs of students who died, and that they died, mipnei shehaita einehem tzara ze lazeh, because their eyes were tight with one another, narrow with one another. In other words, the translation is Rabbi Akiva's 24,000 students died because they were, and here's a direct translation of einehem tzara, ungenerous, parsimonious, stingy, mean, miserly, tight-fisted, mingy, and all of the above. And the all of the above is probably, they exhibited jealousy towards one another, Rabbi Akiva's students. What happened? How does this become the historical, quote-unquote, not truth that has become the historical truth? We don't know exactly, but the way in which rabbinic literature often works is there is an early version of a dispute or a text, and then later redactors and editors and authors embellish in order to make a point about the world in which they are living. And so a very early text about Rabbi Akiva needing to take on or wanting to take on or thinking it's important to take on new students later in life must be because something happened to the students he had earlier in his life. And now that we know what happened to the students earlier in his life, we need to ascribe moral reasoning to that tragedy and learn something from it, and maybe even change our calendar because of it. We don't know what it is exactly the authors of the story meant. We only know that by telling the story in the way they wanted to and creating a memory for us, a living memory for us that would ideally animate our own lives, they wanted to communicate to us that the study of Torah religiosity, in fact, did not prevent them or should not prevent scholars or any humans from being jerks one to the other. Something so unacceptable to them that they told it through a story of 24,000 people dying. Rabbi Asher Weiss, who is one of the great scholars of Jewish law today, he is the Posek, the primary halachic authority of Shaarei Tzedek Hospital in Jerusalem, and has written incredible books on Jewish law. He wrote 2 essays on this particular piece, and he asked 2 questions. One of the questions that Rabbi Weiss asks is, how is it possible that Rabbi Akiva's students are the ones who die for being parsimonious one with the other? How can that be? Because he says Rabbi Akiva is the one who taught V'ahavta l'reacha kamocha, you shall love your neighbor like you love yourself. Ze klal gadol b'Torah. This is the primary principle, meaning, center of Torah. Rabbi Akiva's life was dedicated to teaching the Torah of love your neighbor. Is it not ironic that it is his students, the rabbis, choose to tell this particular story through? It is Rabbi Akiva who taught in Avot, in Pirkei Avot. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam shechianu v'kihimanu v'higyanu lizman hazeh. It's the first time I've ever used Pirkei Avot in a sermon. May it be the last. Rabbi Akiva said, Chaviv Adam shenivra b'tselem. Humans are beloved because we are created in God's divine image. Chibaya teira, nodat lo shenivra b'tselem. But we are loved even more, or our nature of creation is even more beloved in the world because we have been made known that we are created in God's image. It is one thing to be created in God's image as a fact of creation. It is another thing entirely to tell those creations that each and every one of them are created in God's image. The moment in which I know that you are created in God's image, it initiates an obligation. It initiates a responsibility. It initiates a moment in which I say, now that person has to be treated like I want to be treated. Ahavta l'reacha kamocha. Love your neighbor like you love yourself. Or in Rabbi Akiva's original teaching, one should never say, since I have been disparaged, let someone else be disparaged along the way with me. Since I was cursed, let someone else be cursed with me. But Rabbi Akiva's students, Rabbi Weiss points out, his students have not internalized this. They were jealous, stingy. And he says it is because of their intention to serve God and to be faithful that they became jealous one of the other. And he teaches ahavat hamakom tzricha lehavi lidei ahavat habriot, that a love of God can only mean one thing, a love of human beings. He teaches yesh ahavat hamakom meviah lesinat habriot. There are those who love God, who profess to love God, but seem to hate other human beings. That's impossible, he writes. It's impossible because theologically, according to our tradition, those who love God necessarily love other human beings, and those who hate other human beings necessarily do not love God. Loving God must mean loving God's creations. That's what it means to be B'Tselem Elohim. The love of one demands the love of the other because we are of the same stuff. It is a theologically necessary conflation. Quick side note. We live in a time in which it is nearly unheard of for a politician, especially a demagogic one, to be challenged in public. And I don't want to minimize events like that when they happen. So the fact that the president putting his face on the body of Jesus in a meme brought forward criticisms like, I don't know if the president thought he was being funny or if he is under the influence, but this is outrageous blasphemy. Or, I support Trump, I spend 8 hours a day defending him, I will not defend blasphemy. A little humility would serve him well, God shall not be mocked. I don't want to minimize moments in which people stand up for their own beliefs, even sometimes at their own expense. And also, I think this says something pretty awful about the state of this society's morality. That an AI-generated meme provokes outrage is labeled blasphemy, but actual attacks on God's beloved creations go totally unchallenged. Meaning, if I'm willing to stand up and yell about the face of the president over the body of Jesus and say this is blasphemy, but I'm not willing to do the same thing when actual words like they're poisoning the blood of our country, or no, they're not humans, they're animals, if that doesn't provoke outrage for blasphemy, we have some serious soul searching to do. I'll put it another way, God doesn't need our inconsistent defenses of God. God is too big for that, but God's creations in this world very much require human beings to label other human beings' actions as blasphemy when they are diminished to beneath humanity. Rabbi Weiss essentially teaches that it is precisely because it is Rabbi Akiva's students that the rabbis chose to put this story in his name. That's the point. That's the entire point. Rabbi Akiva was the guy for what it means to love one's neighbor. The story is told about his students in hyperbolic parable fashion to make a point about the Torah itself. If the Torah is to survive as an animating force for love and for dignity and for justice, and devotion, those who disseminate it must embody, at the very least as an aspiration, those very traits. And his students were not suitable for that sublime purpose. As we move towards Shavuot during this Omer period, once again to receive Torah, to be offered the gift of redemption and then the promise of some kind of freedom through our particular covenant of service and responsibility, during this Jewishly auspicious time, as we enter the season of Israel's primary national holidays, in which we both mourn the tragic loss of those who died for our 3,000-year-old dream, Yom HaZikaron, in which I hope we have enough space in our hearts to mourn for all of the losses of life that have allowed for this 3,000-year-old dream to be a home in the way that it is. As we celebrate Yom HaAtzmaut, some dream manifest now in modernity, can we digest this story for what it is meant to teach us? Can we take seriously our sages' textually layered warning? Love God, yes. More importantly, take the demand of that love seriously. Respect and honor and be generous, more than generous, to all of those who are created in God's image. Shabbat Shalom.